Other shows we have for you to enjoy at myclassicradio.net. The Avengers was most certainly not a household name in South Africa prior to the radio series. With no national television service until 1976, the mechanism simply was not present in the country to show television programs to mass audiences. While many other countries reveled in the filmed adventures of John Steed and Company, South Africa was not equipped to join in the fun. The series took Britain by storm and made a major impression in the American markets, being that greatest of rarities, a British series given a network transmission slot. However, as a filmed series, rather than a videotaped one, The Avengers was able to gain a modicum of exposure in South Africa through film rentals. Come and listen at myclassicradio.net. Other shows we have for you to enjoy at myclassicradio.net. 21 Precinct was a police drama broadcast on CBS from July 7, 1953, to July 26, 1956. It initially served as a summer replacement for My Friend Irma. The show was produced in cooperation with the Patrolmen's Benevolent Association of City of New York and adaptations from True Criminal in New York. The Policeman's Point of View. Historically, the 21st Precinct had been located near Gramercy Park, Manhattan. In 1929 the department reorganized the precinct numbering, and 21st designation was discontinued. No such precinct existed during the run, nor does a 21st precinct exist. However, the fictional precinct's territory closely corresponds to that of the Upper Side's 23rd precinct since 192. Come and listen at myclassicradio.net.
Calling all detectives. A lonely old recluse never mentioned the existence of a husband who arrived in time for her death. That is the situation on this page from my casebook. The casebook of Jerry Browning, private detective. There's all kinds of evidence. And to be a private detective like me, Jerry Browning, you have to know what evidence to believe. Walking from my car to the big lonely Carstairs house, I wondered why old Mrs. Carstairs clung to the place. She had enough money for the finest house in town instead of this 10-room barn in the middle of nowhere. Yet she'd lived here alone for the past 30 years. I expected Mrs. Carstairs to answer the doorbell. Instead, I saw a man of about 60, solidly built, heavily tanned.
Yes?
I'm Jerry Browning. Mrs. Carstairs expecting me.
I see. May I ask, what is the nature of your business with her?
Sure, I'm a private detective. I've been investigating a company Mrs. Carstairs was considering investing in. Now, I'll ask one. Who are you?
A reasonable question. Come inside, Mr. Browning.
I followed him inside to the gloomy reception hall.
This may surprise you, Mr. Browning. I am Byron Carstairs, Agatha's husband.
He smiled at me, but his eyes were cold and watchful.
In case you're wondering where I've been for the past 30 years, I don't mind telling you. I've been in South Africa.
Well, Mrs. Carstairs never told me that her husband was dead, but neither did she say he was alive. Since it was none of my business, all I said was, "Okay, Mr. Carstairs, will you please tell your wife that I'm here with that report?" Carstairs kept his face bland.
I'm afraid I can't do that, Mr. Browning. You see, she died 2 hours ago.
The man who told me he was a long-lost husband of a lonely old recluse also told me that she was dead. Carstairs led me upstairs to his wife's bedroom.
Poor Agatha. I'm afraid the shock of my arrival was too much for her heart.
I didn't answer, brushed past him, and walked into Mrs. Carstairs' bedroom. She was lying fully clothed on the bed. There was no sign of any struggle in the room, no mark of violence on her. I'll have to call police, Mr. Carstairs, and ask you to stay here until they arrive. Carstairs gave me a thin smile.
I have every intention of staying, Mr. Browning. You forget, this is my home.
The police surgeon walked over to where Lieutenant Dawson of Homicide and I were sitting in the living room. "Looks like a heart attack, all right, but I can't be sure until we make complete lab tests." Dawson nodded, turned to Carstairs, who was standing near the fireplace. "Mr. Carstairs, did your wife die in the bedroom?"
No, Lieutenant. We were downstairs here talking soon after I arrived this evening, and she suddenly collapsed, asked me to help her upstairs. I did so, and she died in my arms.
That's real touching, Mr. Carstairs. How come you didn't call a doctor?
She was dead, Lieutenant. Past medical aid. I was aware of my delicate position here, and I was wondering what course of action to take when Mr. Browning arrived.
I shot a fast question at him. Where did you and Mrs. Carstairs originally come from?
San Francisco, Mr. Browning. We were married there in 1907. I have here the certified copy of our marriage certificate, which I obtained in 1915, just before I left the States.
Dawson took the photostat copy, glared at it, handed it back. I didn't bother to look at the document. Carstairs didn't have any other papers with him, but he had something even better. A suggestion that we go through Mrs. Carstairs' personal papers in search for possible references to him. We turned up a whole sheaf of stuff. Letters he'd written her from South Africa, and now yellow with age. A few copies of replies she'd sent him, in which she'd curtly refused requests for money. We found old photos showing Agatha Carstairs and this man as they might have looked 40 years ago, and even a tattered old wedding picture. Finally, okay, Mr. Carstairs, I guess you're who you claim to be, but until we're satisfied about just exactly how your wife died, we'll have to ask you to remain in this house. That okay with you? Carstairs gave us his bland smile.
It is perfectly satisfactory, Lieutenant.
I followed Dawson out into the reception hall. You're not leaving, are you, Dawson? This guy's a phony. Dawson frowned. You're wrong, Jerry. I say he's a no-good scoundrel and probably shocked the poor old lady to a death, but there's no doubt he's Byron Carstairs, and there's no doubt he'll get him money. Everything we've seen here has been carefully set up for us to see. Nobody would go to all that trouble and yet leave the most essential part of it, her death, to chance. Dawson frowned. Can you prove it? It was a tough spot because I didn't know how Mrs. Carstairs died. Well, Carstairs says she died downstairs, and that makes me think she died upstairs. Let's take another look at that bedroom. Okay, but you're just wasting my time. The body had long since been removed, but the bed still showed the indentation of the frail figure on the smooth counterpane. I stared at the bed. There was something queer about the neatness of the counterpane and the careless way in which the pillows at the head of the bed had been thrust under the bolster. I pulled the counterpane back, picked up one of the pillows. Hey, look at this soiled pillow, Dawson. Those marks right here, as though teeth had tried to bite on it. Dawson, Agatha Carstairs was smothered with this pillow, a form of death whose symptoms resemble certain types of heart attack. Come on, let's arrest the murderer.
I murder poor Agatha? Ridiculous. My wife was considerably my senior, more than 10 years. She was a very sick woman. Could not have lived much longer in any case. I didn't have to kill her.
Yes, you did, because you're not her husband, never were. Let me have a copy of that marriage certificate. Carstairs hesitated, then handed it over. This is a copy dated 1915 of a marriage performed in San Francisco in 1907. I don't need any expert to tell me that this is a forgery. You were very clever with all the fake documents and pictures you planted in the house during the 2 hours you had after you killed Mrs. Carstairs. But you slipped up badly on this marriage certificate. You see, on April 8th, 1908, there was a fire in San Francisco. The San Francisco earthquake and fire. And it destroyed every single public record prior to that date. So you see, you couldn't get a photostat copy of a marriage license of 1907. You're under arrest for murder. He broke down after that, admitted that he'd spent years preparing his crime, patiently forged documents and pictures. It all started when he discovered that the real Byron Carstairs had been executed for murder in Alaska, a fact that his wife spent 30 years concealing. The imposter forged the photostat of the 1907 marriage certificate because that was where and when the Carstairs had really been married. But that was his one and only mistake. Like I said, there's evidence and evidence. And the easiest kind to disbelieve is the kind that cannot possibly exist.